My name is Madeleine Kunu. I'm the president of Leading Women of Africa, a Pan-African women institution based in Cape Town in South Africa. We are advancing women's leadership, entrepreneurship, and African regional integration. And I'm also the convener of Beyond Boundaries, the platform that we are using today for this discussion. Uh, Beyond Boundaries is a platform dedicated to amplify women's voices, in particular in geopolitics, global affairs, leadership, governance, and development. So it is really my honor to welcome you all to this session of Women in Geopolitics Debate series. We continue today again, we continue to talk about women's leadership. Last week, we started with the political aspect of women's in leadership, where we were talking about why are there so few female presidents in Africa. So it was a very, very interesting session. So if you missed the session, you can watch the video or the recording on our YouTube channel. Right. So, yeah, we were talking about International Women's Day. So let me first start by saying Happy International Women's Day. Happy International Women's Day to everyone around the world. And believe it or not, it has been 115,000, no, 115 years, sorry, of the journey to women's empowerment, right? So that was even long before Africa started the wave of independence in the 60s. So it has been a long, long time ago that we have started this day. So, this movement of women empowerment, which started in 1911. Right. So we know that this month, it's actually a time when the world reflect on women's rights, women's participation, and women's leadership. Like I was saying, last week we examined, since the independence, the wave of independence in the 60s, women that have occupied the highest position only represent less than 3%. So despite all this advocacy and policies and the Beijing conference, we know about the Millennium Development Goals, we know about the Agenda 2063, the Maputo Protocol when we're talking about Africa. However, we can see that women remain underrepresented in the highest position or decision-making positions at all level. And the question really on leadership, it goes beyond presidency. Yes, last week we discussed about presidency. So the whole debate goes beyond that. We need to look at all spheres of power, whether it is in politics, in corporate governance, in business, in entrepreneurship, global policies and development institution. We need to see more women, so literally we can see that women are still lagging behind. And I know in today's debate, there will be quite a lot of that. Are we behind? Are we ahead? Are we on par to what's happening? And for me, I think if women still absent, it's not really lack of capability or lack of capacity. I think for me, it's more the power of architecture, the way the society is being built. But then the argument is as well, yes, we can argue all this, but we need to remember as well that there is progress. Yes, I want to acknowledge there is a bit of progress, which will be discussed today. However, the reality on the ground as well is telling a different story, and that's what the discussion today. Let's be open when we ask ourselves, how can we ensure that women emerge as successful leaders in whatever they are doing, whether in politics, in corporate, in business, in entrepreneurship, and maybe also what structural reforms are required to actually ensure that women emerge, or women even pull others, because there are already some that are already there. Right. So today we are honored to be joined by three distinguished women from around the world, from South Africa, from Nigeria, and from Europe, whose work span around faith, faith leadership, global policy, academia, entrepreneurship, and governance. I really hope Reverend Victorine is already in the room. If you're already in the room, please just, let me hear your voice. Otherwise, let me start. Reverend Victorine Kiruka from Nigeria, a distinguished faith leader, global speaker, and entrepreneur with more than 2 decades of ministry and over 3 decades of business leadership experience. She leads initiatives empowering women and entrepreneurs and serves as a president and CEO of African International Trade Network and African Women International Trade Hub. Then we're going to also hear from Africa, Garcia Zanella. We were just joking about her name earlier on. How did she get the name of Africa to herself? But yeah, maybe you can chat to her after the meeting. She can tell you what her parent did. She is an international policy advisor with over 20 years of experience advancing gender equality, climate finance, and sustainable development within the UN and EU framework. She has advised multilateral institutions, including the UN agencies, global climate investment platforms on gender responsive governance. She has demonstrated a strong commitment to Africa. That's why she's here, actually, and the global cooperation advancing gender equality and sustainable development. We will also hear from Dr. Lefatse Moagi she is a lecturer of international relations at the University of South Africa and serves as a gender transformation coordinator, a feminist post-colonial scholar specializing on gender studies, youth development, and political philosophy. So, you are all welcome. Well, let me start. Let's get started. Right, Dr. Moagi, let me start with you, ma'am. Let me start with you.
Yes,
From your academic and policy perspective,
yes.
where do you see the most significant leadership gap for women today, whether it is in politics, in governance, in finance, in entrepreneurship, in corporate? Where do you see those gaps?
Thank you so much for the introduction. That's a very good question. Since we're already going to be celebrating International Women's Day on the 8th of March, which is going to be a Sunday, but we'd like to give acknowledgement to women who've paved the way for so many other women to be able to participate in spaces that were actually marginalized to them, such as Wangari Maathai, as you know, from Kenya, and a world-renowned also academic from South Africa, Mrs. Charlotte Manye Matlake. So I think that's really important that we give acknowledgement to such women. I know perhaps maybe there are others who can be able to come in and also provide acknowledgement to those type of women, but in this case, it's really important that when we talk about gender development and women's development and looking at the acceleration of women's access to executive leadership, we basically look into the public spaces where women's participation can be accelerated and what could be the stumbling block that we see that not actually happening. I mean, this is 2026, the year 2026, when we've seen so many policies that the African Union has created, so many gender mainstreaming policies, sustainable development goals that have also been created in order to challenge the status quo for women's participation in governance, in corporate, in finance, in politics, as you mentioned. And going to your question that you actually asked, which is extremely important. Mind you, I'm in political sciences and international relations. Perhaps my colleagues will come in, those who are in finance or who are in the areas of corporate, that can be able to provide us with the statistics of what are we seeing around the world when it comes to women's development and participation. And what are the challenges that women are experiencing from the corporate side in order for us to see the 50-50 equilibrium being reached. We cannot speak about women's participation also excluding the gender that is actually behind so many stumbling blocks that we see women not being able to reach their full potential in so many areas. Obviously, patriarchy, which I think that some of my colleagues can also touch on, also in faith-based areas and including in corporate. So I think for me, that question is really important because of we have to ask ourselves, what is leadership without power? What is leadership without influence? What is leadership without having a mandate or the authority to be legitimized? I think it won't be quite, we'll be doing a lot of injustice if we say that we want to increase women's participation in corporate, in governance, in finance, in entrepreneurship, or rather in business, and let me just frame it that way, where we would find that women do not have any enough influence or even power. They can be legitimate or have the authority to be able to take those positions, but what are positions without authority, or what are positions without influence? What are positions without mandated to actually have a major influence and also being decisive as well. We've also seen affirmative action, other quotas being increased for women's participation, but is it only on paper? To say that we're going to use the quota system to be able to increase women's participation in politics and governance, or even within the business sector to create more space for women to have a lot of influence, but do they hold enough power? So for me, when you're asking that question, is that perhaps some of my colleagues would come in and give us the more statistics about the corporate environment where women's participation. But myself being in academia is that in the academic field is that we've seen a lack of women taking executive positions. Executive positions meaning vice chancellorship positions. I can give an example in South Africa because I'm in South Africa. We have more than approximately 30 institutions of higher learning. But within those institutions of higher learning, how many are women who are vice chancellors or principals? Or how many are women who have actually taking up those executive positions to lead their portfolios, whether it can be in research or in teaching and learning, or it can be in decision making, example, deans or faculty head or leaders. So we also need to unpack that. Because of based in the South African perspective is that there's only a few out of a 30 higher learning institutions who are women or already actually under five. I'll just put it that way. A few that I know who have taken the leadership positions in the executive management to become vice chancellors of universities or institutions of higher learning. So what do we do in order for us to accelerate seeing more women participating in executive positionship? I think issues of mentorship is extremely important. We need to be able to come in and mentor young women to be able to provide them with the confidence that they can be able to take up those type of positions that are in power. And mentorship, as I've mentioned, also issues of power as well. What is power without influence? How is it possible that we can provide women with the opportunities to be in positions, but not give them the necessary tools for them to utilize those powers? And I think this is where the aspect of corporate come in. Corporate leadership. What is it to lead? How is it to manage individuals? How is it being a woman that you have to be able, you're leading in institutions, in an institution, and now you have to come in and learn how to manage other genders, male structures who will be there, and also framing on how the society has actually made women to conform to a certain status within society, that women are emotional, so therefore they are unable to take leadership positions, and that women's role is not actually within executive management, but is within the lower ranks. But so I think it's extremely important that we provide the women with those tools. So, Madeline, I don't know if I've taken much of my time, but yeah, that's my answer to the question that you posed.
No, thank you so much. Thank you for that. I like the aspect of power without influence because, yeah, I've come across where you meet a minister of gender. She has power, but she has no budget to actually run her department properly because it's women. Yeah, women without power. But I like also the approach of how can we accelerate, and one of them which you've touched is mentorship. So I think the few women that are emerging, that are climbing that ladder of success, need to think and pull others and mentor others so that, yeah, there could be more there. And the issue of quota system, so I know that, especially at public space, they are trying to use it, but as you can see, let's see what Africa's Zanella can tell us. What do you see there? In terms of so now looking at it from the global perspective and your experience in global policy and gender governance, what do you see? You give us your perspective there.
Okay. The first thing that I would like to say is that not all women are created equal. That's the first one. Essentially, what we're talking about when we talk about women, I said this at the King's College Leadership Women Institute, that we need to understand that essentially women have a very crucial role to play in society and should do so without barriers. Full stop. That's number one. Without barriers essentially means that each individual talent can move forward and do what they feel is necessary and also aligns with their nature and what have you. One of the reasons why I started working with the UN is because I was approached by I was in the OECD because I'm an economist by trade, by the way, and I was approached and they said, look, we understand human rights. I mean, the Beijing Convention already established the right of women. However, how does that implement? How does that carry through to economics? Because without economics, we don't have the power. We need that independence of economics. The second aspect of it, we are social beings. Essentially, we have a reproductive function, which we must consider. And that actually has been looked at as a barrier rather than a contribution. Without women, we do not have, another big headline of mine, without women, we do not have sustainability. Simple. We cannot survive. So the realities of today is that women are getting better educated, but not moving forward at a fast enough rate. The second part of it is that when we look at women, I must emphasize this point. We are looking at three scenarios for a corporate contribution. or a political contribution. We're looking at a scenario where women have no children. We have a scenario where women have children, and we're looking at a scenario where women have to choose between part-time work, no work, or continue work. Now, those are issues that are very personal and also at the same time impacting social. The social system is a key element of sustainability, and we need to pound that into government. We need to pound that into civil society. We need to pound that into any management system that actually works towards a better world. Now, as I said previously, the framework of each country is very different. In Africa, we have cultural aspects which are a deterrent. We have a colonial, post-colonial, pre-colonial, all that mix, number one. Secondly, we have a continent which is full of diversity, where they're still fighting for unity of thought, unity of action, unity of mission, unity of economics, etc., etc. And the one important aspect that I will emphasize today, being a political animal, as I am, and also having been involved in diplomacy like I have, I can assure you that Africa has a very strong role to play in the future of the world. And I think every woman, every man, everybody should really adopt this attitude. We are important in the world now, more so than ever before, because of your natural resources, because of your talent, and also because the cultural barriers need to somehow adapt and align to this new world. I can go on telling you, I have a whole list here that I have research that says, you got problems with culture, you got problems with, paternalism, you got problems with this, and you got problems with that. We all have problems. All countries, no country will actually achieve the SDG 5 goal. And I have fortunate enough to work with UNIDO, the SDG 9. The SDG 9 is about innovation and technology. Now, there, I can tell you, I have some good news. Because Africa is leading the world for women in technology. In many countries, if we compare it, I have some statistics here where Africa progressed in women leadership in Rwanda, in South Africa, especially in Rwanda with politics, in South Africa with technology, and we have a lot of fields that we need to explore. And above all, Madeline, I am a very forceful, positive human being. Essentially means I do not consider that gender is an issue. You have to consider yourself as a contributor to your society, to the place where you live and work, and to the world if you can. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to do all of that in one lifetime. I have got some statistics there, which I wanted to share with you because it is important. There are two fields, Madeline, that you asked me. Oh, and besides, please forgive me, I get carried away with my passion, which is equality. And that means that I have lost my manners by saying thank you very much for having me here. And it is a pleasure. I've known Madeline for quite some time now, and it's always a beautiful experience to work with her. Anyway, onwards, we have divided, you have divided, we have divided the world into politics, or more so into the world of government, which is where I started my career. I was head of international trade for the Queensland government in Australia. And then the next thing is there is the concept of, private sector. And there I wanted to bring forward an example which is so crucial to what we're looking at. Yes, it is true that the African Union is having a huge impact in bringing about change. Okay, bringing about change, but it's a slow change. It is true that you're making more impact on politics that you are, and in government, that you are in the private sector. That's also true. However, one example I want to put forward to all of you, I have a few slides and a few references, which I hope Madeline will distribute to the people who are interested in receiving them, because we talk about the London School of Economics, talking about where are women on boards, for example. We need to know the statistics. We need to know the data. We need to collect data. Not every African country is in a position to collect data. I've had to deal with climate investment funds and understand some of the issues relating to how to present proposals, what technology do you have, etc., etc. So all of that is hindering progress, but not necessarily putting barriers, because the world is changing and Africa is making an impact. So I wanted to bring to your notice the fact that there is a gender plan practically everywhere in the world, developed by government. There is a laws in the United Nations, CEDAW, and everything else regarding domestic violence against women. But has it made an impact? Has it changed a lot? Because I tell you, whether it's Australia, Spain, Africa, China, anywhere in the world, women are still being domestically violated. And now more so coming out, how from the USA, which is just, I won't talk about. So my example here today, and what I feel is important for you to understand, is that while there is a plan, a gender plan, for example, in the European Union, okay, that stays in a file unless someone finds a mechanism to implement it. And implementation is key. So one key example, and I'll give it to you as a case study, is the fact that I was hired by a scientific infrastructure in the European Union in order to go into the organization and develop its individual gender plan. You would say, wow, when they forward thinking? No, my dear, no. The fact of the matter is Horizon 20, which distributes funds throughout the union, puts as a special requirement that if you're going to obtain funds from the European Union, you must have a gender plan and hire an expert to undertake that task. So whether they liked it or didn't like it, a private sector institution, if given the mechanism implemented by any policy in government that says it's all very well that you're working in a market which is giving you a lot of profit. However, you have to develop an internal policy which is beyond tokenism or beyond any other than the reality that women have to have a share of society. And if that is economics, then women have to have a share of the economic gains of any corporate, any instrument which is worked within the society context. So that is an important case study. I had to deal with 5 principles there, amongst which was there aren't enough women in science. Nonsense. Within a year, I increased it by 30%. Because you had to have an expert working within the organization. You can't just keep on repeating ad nauseum every bias and every prejudice that exists. We can only bring about change if we're willing to understand that things change quickly and in every scenario. And as an economist, I can tell you, we say we sort of put something which is a scientist. We always look for one, common sort of thing, which is your control group. But that things are changing, and in Africa things are changing. Well, so I got some good news, and I wanted to share with you because when I hear about how people perceive Africa, I get very annoyed. Because there's a lot of talented, a lot of very powerful women. There are women, in Rwanda. I mean, the political system in Rwanda is an absolute example to the world. And what is happening in South Africa, equally so. And the thing is that forget about the patriarchal. Forget about the representation unless you start willing to lobby through civil society. Civil society has a role to play in lobbying, just like government has a role to play in policy. So onwards and upwards, there are a lot of networks and organizations that actually would help African women to join forces like you're doing, Madeline, networking, so you actually get, support. Tell me when I have to stop, all right? Now, I have, if you look at the traditional economics models, you will find that agriculture, textile, healthcare, education, and are the traditional industries for you to look into. However, I'm going to put my hands upwards and say the digital era is your era. Okay? And I have worked with SDG 9 with the UN, as I mentioned earlier, to do exactly just that in Russia. And I found out the labor participation rate in Russia in the area of science is the highest in the world. So there you are. I mean, and now, the good news that I wanted to give you, which I've got it over here somewhere. Well, Rwanda leads globally with 60% women in parliament. South Africa and Ethiopia have achieved gender parity in ministerial cabinets. Namibia recently had a female president with a majority female candidate. That's just on the government front. Now, if you look at what challenges we have, is really in the corporate board sector, where about 12% of corporate board seats in Africa are held by women, only 12%, compared to a much higher rates in a lot of European countries. Now, I mentioned, how amazing it is that, we're still here and we're making inroads as leaders, because we do have a very strong need for work-life balance. We have children. Some of us have children. And those that have it a lot harder than anyone else. So let me go back. The encouraging terms, I think, is there as well. In terms of the private sector, in the corporate sector, is also showing some promise, okay? Also showing some promise. But there's still a long way to go. In private equity, for example, women make up 44% of the workforce. At what level, we have to ask? Because it is necessary to understand that there has to be a culture within the organization that allows women to go forward without any barriers. And those barriers have to be eliminated. First of all, you have to be identified, and secondly, eliminated. And also, you sort of have a lot of things. I think, Madeline, you mentioned very interesting how, you can have the position, but you don't have the finance. What the hell do you do? Well, interesting enough, out of UN Women, I think it came out, women-led startups received only 48 million in funding in 2024 versus 2 billion in male-led enterprises. Now, having been part of an innovation committee in the EU, I can assure you there's some roaring going on down there that, women in parliaments are sort of lobbying and doing things that need to do. Okay, now, so that's essentially, unless you want me to answer any particular questions, Madeline, it's up to you. But,
Right.
I think...
I'm sure there will be more questions.
Yeah.
And I will actually
point,
ask the audience.
Yeah, one last point, very important. Both UN Women, United Nations, and European Union, and a lot of countries within the global north, in particular, are advocating quotas in order to get to boards. Okay, so this is something that has to be lobbied ad nauseum to everyone. Quotas, because it is the beginning of something. Now, it's only with that support that change takes place. And that's it, as far as I'm concerned, I think, unless you want more questions, and I'll wait for that later. Thank you very much.
I'm sure there will be. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
And
ladies.
actually, you loaded us with just so much.
Sorry.
You really unpack. No, which is good. We need all this info, especially when you touch about Africa is still fighting for unity in everything, in policy, in politics, and that is very, very important point.
Yeah.
Because it's like, and like you rightly say, I mean, Africa has so much potential. Africa is the future of tomorrow, but yet we're still kind of fighting about this, about that, and so instead of uniting ourselves and working together. But one also important point that you make is that, you do not see a reproductive system of women as a barrier. It should actually be as a contribution,
Yeah.
and you don't believe in any barrier. However, you mentioned about, yes, the AU is making progress. However, it's very slow. So at institutional level, there could still be barriers. Yes, please, let's have some comment in a chat if you have. Let us now get to Reverend, who has been really, she is at the intersection of faith leadership, business, entrepreneurship. So, Reverend, welcome. And the question now, I think you've heard Mr. Nella Africa, really unpacking literally the progress that have been made, but also the challenges, the barriers that are still there, whether it is in business, and she gave a bit of stats there. In business, you operate in a business space, where you actually interact women across industries within the entrepreneurship space, and that's what we need. I think the economic development or sustainability that the world needs, that Africa needs, it's actually around entrepreneurship. And however, what we also see within the space that you operate in entrepreneurship, we see that women are dominating the informal economic activities. So, with all the policies, I think even Doctor has alluded to the fact that, yes, there are policy, but again, the progress is slow. But how come the good policies that we do have, in different countries, even at our AU, we have the Agenda 2063, we have the Maputo Protocol, we have the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals that Zanella is mentioning, in her presentation. Why all this has not translated into leadership of women within the larger scale of business and entrepreneurship, from your perspective, Reverend Victorine? You are muted, ma'am. Now you need to unmute yourself. You are still muted. Great. Now we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now. Go on.
Yes.
Sorry, I've been on and off the meeting because I don't have a stable network. I just trust I'll be able to speak. I should just go straight to the question you asked. Thank you for
Yes, you
this.
can go straight, considering your challenge of connectivity.
Thank you for this opportunity. And when you were speaking, because of the network issues, I was not hearing everything. It was just coming on and off. It's been a challenge we've been experiencing for some weeks. We trust God it to be fine. And you asked a question, you said, how important are, yes, how important are network of women supporting women? Is that the question?
The question is more why the policies, the good policies that we have in Africa has not translated into seeing more women in leadership and entrepreneurship space.
Okay, thank you for the question. It is true that women dominate many informal economic activities across Africa. However, this is not translated into equivalent leadership in large scales. Like you said, large scale businesses, primarily because of the structural barriers. The structural barriers. And firstly, many women entrepreneurs, they face challenges. They face limited access to challenges like limited access to finance, capital, and often because they lack collateral, such as land and property, which we all know what is obtainable in most cultures, especially in Africa, where women don't have access to properties like that. Like from where I come from, in the part of Nigeria I come from, they will tell you a woman has no business with land and property. Especially some years ago, I have a personal experience where I was a young lady. I went into business very early, and I had opportunity to buy landed properties then. But when I mentioned it to my family, they said, you don't dare not do that. A woman can't own property and land. You won't get married. People will feel, so that mindset, but now people are breaking out of it. I have a lot of regret because if I'd known what I know today, I would have acquired a lot at a very early age because I started business in my early 20s. As soon as I came out of school, I just worked for 1 year and I went into business because of my entrepreneurial background I inherited from my parents. So that's one of the challenges. Then secondly, there are institutional and structural gaps that limits women's entry into corporate leadership pipelines and industry sectors, which we know is obtainable in almost all the countries of the world, not just Africa, you know. Then thirdly, women frequently have less access to strategic networks, leadership, and high-level business opportunities that help them scale in business. When I talk of strategic networks, there are some places people believe women shouldn't enter, especially when it comes to political, you gain a lot of access, get a lot when you have those connections, those networks. They believe when you are doing that, they say she's doing too much. So because of it, there are less strategic networks and mentorship and high-level business opportunities that women can access and that which will help them scale in enterprises. So as a result of it, many women remain concentrated in their informal sectors, which you rightly say, their informal sectors. Despite their strong entrepreneurial capacities, women are capable. They are capable. A lot of them are capable, but despite that, they are limited in areas like that. Yeah, so in Africa, it's very serious. If we are serious about achieving the inclusive growth and vision in African Union 2063, under the leadership vision of African Union, we must intentionally create pathways that help women from informal participation to formal economic leadership. And then African women scale their businesses to not only transform their enterprises, they transform economies if they are given the opportunities. But because of all this limited access that we have, women are finding it difficult to be able to transform their enterprises. And if they have the opportunity, they can transform economies. So African women are not short of enterprise or ambition. What they are short of is equal access to capital, opportunity, and leadership platforms. I don't know
Oh,
if they
wow. Yeah, no, thank you so much for that contribution. I think the structural barriers that you mentioned earlier on, maybe we need to dig a bit deeper
Sorry,
into
what did you
that,
say?
the limited access to productive resources, all the structural gaps, institutional and structural gaps, and lack of strategic network. But I'm sure that we can do it ourselves. I think all we need is access to that. And yeah, I agree with you. More pressure is needed, so that we can get the AU on board so they can understand. Really, like you said, there's no shortage of women, creative, innovative women that can enter into the business and contribute in the GDPs of their countries and contributing job creation, but we need access to those resources. So maybe talking about those barriers, let me come back to Dr. Moagi. Uh, with regard to those barriers, what kind of reforms that Africa need? Starting with the AU, I think a reform is needed somewhere because we all acknowledge the potential and the power of African women, but why aren't we're still on that journey? What
Yeah.
kind of reforms are needed?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, Madeleine. I think the most important thing when we talk about reform, we have to also talk about who are the individuals reforming those policies.
Mm,
Are they political leaders, and what type of political leaders? Are they male political leaders? Are they women political leaders? As we know, we're already struggling with positions of women in politics.
mm,
Pretty sure that we all know. And then I think that you say that last week you had a discussion whereby we did not see enough women who participate in politics or who are being presidents. We only have a few in Tanzania, in the SADC region, in Namibia, as we had seen recently, and also making emphasis on obviously the previous African Union leader who was from South Africa, Dr. Zuma. So we
mm,
have to look at who are individuals who are pioneering those types of reforms. And I think one important thing that we have to also make the emphasis on in this discussion is that where are the women caucuses in
mm,
Africa, rather all over the world, and what is a women caucus? We've seen them in so many spaces whereby they are non-governmental organizations. They have an influence in decision making concerning participation of women, example, in rural areas, participation of women in rather having the voice to speak for those women in those areas. But where are the voices of women in caucus groups or organizations? I know recently South Africa, there was a creation of the Beijing Plus Women Movement Caucus, which I think is a good example of where we are heading in terms of seeing women organized groups, very educated women who've got so much influence in previously having participated in spaces such as politics and also in their social spaces, organizing themselves to say that these are the challenges that we are experiencing as women, and we want to be the voice to be part of the reform agenda. So we
mm,
have to ask the question, who are the leading role players in the reformation? Example, where we are situated in higher education, there has to be gender transformation officers. I think it's something that we're trying to pioneer in each and every institution, that in each and every public space or corporate space, that there has to be a voice of influence from women who are expert in issues of gender, so that when there are policies that have to be transformed or that are being presented in those spaces, that there are experts out there who can be able to add on onto those voices, that these are the transformation that is required, that are needed in order to uplift women's positions, in order to fund women's caucuses so that it can have a major influence in those corporate areas. So that is just my response to that.
No, definitely, I agree. I agree that women voices need to be amplified. Definitely on the continent, we need to amplify women's voices. And, those women organized groups need to really be influential. And I like your first question when you ask who are making those reforms. And I think it starts by there. So if women are not on a table, like we always say, if you're not on a table, you'll be on the menu. So then it'll be really very, very interesting to see that women need to continue organizing themselves. I think they were quite, politically, and I think really maybe what we need to ask ourselves, um, politically, there were so many movements. Even right here in South Africa in 1956, women had to move, you know, uh, gather and, push for change. But now so many countries have already gotten the independence, Now it's now the economic development that we're fighting for, those positions of influence. And it feels like we are slowing down. So I like really your motivation to say, women, where are the women caucuses around the continent? Maybe that is a question that we need to continue asking ourselves. And we need to ensure that, women really organize themselves. And even Ms. Zanella has mentioned earlier on that the civil society is key to any transformation. So, Zanella, let's maybe continue with that thought of
Just
that
thinking about that.
transformation.
Yeah. It's a multitude of things, and Lefachi. How do you
Yes,
pronounce
Africa. Yes, Anila. Yes.
Lefachi?
It means the
Lefachi
world,
point.
by the way.
Yeah, sort of bringing in a very sort of important academic and perspective, and I'm sure she has enormous wealth of data and everything else. That is important because you can't build a house without a good base, and so that's important. I do bring civil society because civil society has a very interesting. I did a lot of work in this in the Climate Investment Fund with civil society as a civil society representative, and that essentially means you have a lot more freedom for advocacy. You have a lot more voice to be taken into account. So I'm going to ask you very clearly to lobby government in the field of quotas. Go for quotas. You have to get a focus of civil society saying, hey guys, need to. This is quota. Here are the facts. Here's how other countries have done it. And this is how we can do it. I think that's very important. I also, that's one of my key points always in terms of that. Network. Okay, yeah, you got sort of a network that mentioned, how you can sort of work together and so on and so forth. But the key here is government generally leads equality, diversity, and social issues. Corporate leads on finance and on economics, on labor, on all other separate issues. Labor participation rate is a huge field in the United Nations. I'm sorry to say that at this point of time they're in a bit of a rut, but there's some very important data coming out of UN, women in particular, and I think that if that is an important network. It's also the IFC, International Finance Corporation, has got a separate fund, which is for Africa's women organizations. We have to lobby those organizations and try to see how small or how big. Madeline, you know me, I'm always looking for the money. The money is the basis for trying to do something, because you can have a voice, but nobody hears it. Or you can have a voice and let it be heard. And for that, it requires funding. It requires an enormous amount of funding. So I just thought of that issue because as we were talking, that the Africa Women's Development Fund is one that I think we should start looking at and see how far we can get in terms of projects. One of my International Women's Day campaign that I was leading in the European Union was the voices of women in science. Okay, so the voices of women in development might be something that they might be willing to promote in some way or another. And a civil society should be the leader of that, not the government, the civil society. Government is politics. Politics is complex. And especially in as you mentioned, Madeline, the whole issue of new country, new ideas, new mission, and keep on saying to yourself, guys, Africa is not a homogeneous group. We need a unified vision. We haven't got it yet. However, having said that, I also go to the micro level and see how women in Africa in tech are higher rate than Latin America, than Asia, than a lot of other global fronts. So, there are opportunities. Technology is here, and technology must be taken over by women. And the UN, the SDG 9 is an important one because they don't want to fall behind either. So that would be my thoughts really. But find the money trail.
Find the money trail. That's what we need to do. But thank you for that. Africa's idea or Zanella's idea, because you say let's use that Zanella
Our
for
idea.
now,
Let's
just to
talk
avoid
about
confusion.
Let's talk about the group. Let's
Right.
unify Africa.
Yeah. So Zanella's idea is really how, with her experience on all those platforms, how can women organize themselves so we can access those funds? Because, so I think that is really an area that, we can discuss, we can see, put together some women and see what is available. Because I agree with what you say, power without influence, it's really nothing, so we can mobilize ourselves as women. If there's no funding, we're not going to get anywhere. So thank you for those
Madeline,
ideas.
just one point, very important point, I think. For example, I have become very involved with women in the Mediterranean region. Okay, women in the Mediterranean region, they organize, they get a lot of funding from Europe, a lot of funding, because Europe is always concerned about the barrier with Africa.
Okay.
A geopolitical concept. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And having been born in Africa, guys, I have been born in Africa. I was born in that Mediterranean region. And so I've been involved with that group, and I see how they're thriving. They're really, look it up if you like. In my LinkedIn, it shows the women in the Mediterranean, right? It was just one meeting where there was 42 ministers gathered to sign an agreement and how they were going to do it. So Morocco was there, all the northern part of Africa. So I think, there's another, look at it as a mentor, that organization. So that's what I wanted to say, because it just came to my head that Morocco is also Africa.
Yeah.
And we have to think about how they're doing in terms of women leadership in science, in particular. Once again, in science. Okay, sorry about that.
No, that's very, very interesting. And those in the chat, I will get back to you. But let's just finish this thought with Reverend. I think what Zanella is telling us, how can we have a unified voice? When it comes to entrepreneurship, and how can we even just tap into some existing funding? I know that Africa at the moment, and especially sub-Saharan Africa, obviously we are now in a position where we don't want to be bought by money. We don't want to be, to basically be misled, because we receive funding. However, there are funding that are available that will not necessarily going to influence our unity or the way we see development. So, Reverend, from your point of view, because you were talking about, the lack of access to networking, and those networking are very important. It's actually what leads to how we can have that unified voice. And we are here, we're discussing because we're looking for solution. So from your perspective, because you run a network of business women and entrepreneurs and so on, what need to be done so that Africa can have that unified voice?
Okay. Can I go ahead?
Go ahead, man.
Okay. I think the most important thing, which personally, I am passionate about, is on networking, partnership, and collaboration. Because when we look at the challenges women face in businesses, the most important, like we said, is funding, access to capital. But when we network, we come together, women supporting women is very, very, very important at a critical time like this. It has been like this for some time. And that's the only way, women can accelerate in positions of leadership and success in business. But networking, collaboration, partnership is very, very important, which I'm very passionate about. And like in my organization, we have different partnership communities, which we know that individually we can do it, or being especially women. And when we come together as women supporting each other, we become there are many talented women, but they remain in the margin, competence, but because they lack strong networks and collaboration. If we come together, not as competitors, but as complementing each other, we build a stronger force. And that's what we are trying to do. And even through these meetings, trying to network with women of different nations of Africa. We come together, we have one voice, and with it, I'm sure we will do a lot. And even when we have access to those fundings, they'll be utilized properly because we work as a group. I was talking about a neighborhood because I always speak with maybe example for us to understand. I was talking about neighborhood partnership, agricultural, farming, savings, and so on projects. Because those women, there are some women that if it comes to the area of agriculture, maybe in rural areas or even in the urban areas, they have large expanse of land bed. Most times they don't have the capital to get the city, get what it takes to build that business to be what it should be, to affect a lot or even influence her community. But if that same woman has about, let's say, 10 women come together to cultivate in that her large expanse or maybe acres or hectares of land, you find out that all of them coming together, putting their resources together, they will achieve more in a very short time than just one person staying there and struggling to get it. So basically, the networking, partnership, and collaboration of women in Africa is very, 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 important at a time like this. It will help the acceleration of women and help them to scale in their businesses. Then another thing I would like to talk about is when women intentionally support one another and we create paths for mentorship. Mentorship is very important and share opportunities, just like we are doing now, just like you do in most of your meetings, you know, and recommend each other for leadership roles, not competing, recommend them where you know they fit in well, leadership role, not just in your community, but even internationally. You recommend them for leadership roles and build confidence needed to step into positions of influence because women need that confidence. But when you stay in the margin, most times you struggle alone, most of them feel they have it, they have the capacity, but they feel they can't occupy that role. So women need that mentorship and encouragement in that area.
Mm.
That's that. If there's any other question you can ask, but
Great, thank you so much. Let's just hear what the audience is saying in the chat, if there's any, so they feel part of this, part of the meeting. Nomonde say, I'm from Eastern Cape in South Africa. The plight of women here is really bad, especially rural women. Very strange. 2 years back, government adopted a women empowerment and gender equality strategy. Fortunately, I was part of the handover ceremony by UNFPA. The document is surely picking up dust somewhere in HOD's office, no implementation. Right, so really talking about implementation. Right. Nomonde again says we are trying as a Western Cape Women Association to amplify women's voices from the province. Funding is indeed a challenge. Right, yeah, funding is always a challenge. Okay, let's continue. We'll have Dr. Sunny, who said disparity of leadership in Africa may not have been caused by old boys. Oh, that is actually a statement, Dr. Sunny. By old boys' action by a default position that the global leadership status quo find itself. The UN research of 2024 reveals that that of 195 CV countries in the world, over 110 have never had a female head of state. Yes, I think that have actually confirmed. It's just a confirmation of what we discussed last time. Even in America, the longest and one oldest democracy of over 250 years have had no female president. Okay. Right. Retumet has said, this is a topic very dear to my heart and keen on pursuing my PhD on this and the importance of training the younger female generation now to be ready and participate in politics and take their place in leading their nation, in leading their nations. Definitely. I think that's why the women definitely need to unite and see what they can do. So, Doctor, maybe you can, Dr. Moagi, maybe you can just clarify there. Where we're talking about the mentorship, because you mentioned about the mentorship earlier on. And as you can see, Retumet says, alluding the same thing, where you can groom the next generation so they can take the place. So, really from academic perspective, how are we doing? How that mentorship is structured? And do you have any data? I know Zanella loves data to see how that mentorship process is
Stop
going.
it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the question. I think the issue of mentorship also needs to go hand in hand with accessibility. It's also important that someone can be in a woman can be in a leadership position, but you find that they are not known out there. So meaning that the platform should be given to them by institutions to be able to set the standard that they are accessible to mentor and to have mentees. So, example, in South Africa, we used to have something called Take a Girl Child to Work. I don't actually know what happened to that type of initiative, but then that type of initiative was actually implemented and supported financially by corporate. So meaning that there isn't a lot of investment now on those type of initiatives of take a girl child to work, and that should be actually be implemented and sustained by governance structures. I think Zanella mentioned something about politics and governance. Is that it's really difficult for individuals to actually go into politics because of politics is really quite dynamic. It has a lot of all these intricacies that you would find that individuals, particularly the woman, will try to shy away from it because it will be seen as a very dangerous territory for women to participate in purely because of its aggressive nature. So you would find that civil organizations would be better suitable to actually provide mentorship programs, but yet they lack funding. So how do they get access to funding to still sustain initiatives such as the Take a Girl Child to Work, whereby they're mentoring young girls on positions in leadership, and also how to be able to have that confidence to have a voice and not to shy away from taking up positions. So we have to create a connection between accessibility. It should not be far-fetched from the society and be given that platform. Technology was mentioned as well. So you would find that there are women in the rural areas but do not have access to technology. How would they else know about such platforms that you're providing for us to be able to, engage in scholarship of women's participation and development? So meaning that governance structures also need to come in, and investment from the corporate area also needs to come in to say that how are they going to foster that gap between rural women in rural areas, empowering them in allowing them to be able to have access to know about such platforms that we are having, to be able to talk about the challenges that they are experiencing. So funding is really quite important to be able to bridge that gap.
No, definitely very, very important. And corporate need to come on board, the governance structures and so on, like you say. I mean, corporate need to definitely play their role because I see development is like a tripartite kind of agreement. There's the government that, lay down the conducive environment, then there's corporate, but then there's civil society. So basically the three legs of the three pillars of development need to interact for anything to happen. Yeah, so definitely I agree with you there. But you mentioned something very important, and that is partnership, where the corporate need to come on board, the governments and so on. And I think Reverend, you also mentioned earlier on, she mentioned earlier on networking, collaboration, and also partnership. And Zanella, from her point of view, is like, hey, you girls in Africa, look at what the Mediterranean women are doing. How can you also organize yourselves? And
Yes.
really, my question to Zanella would be, how would you recommend that really women, become so solid to have that unified voice? What are the steps that you think need to be taken?
Well, it's always important to look at the macro issue, geopolitical, number one, and secondly, look at the individual contribution of each country. What are we looking for? For example, we know that the progress, economic progress, and social progress of Africa is not homogeneous. And I started off by saying that Africa is a continent, and also women is a gender. The thing is that as I'm sitting here, Madeline, I'm thinking, why don't we? And I mean we, I mean you, and us, as a group, start off by setting up committees. I think someone in the chat said, what committee is there here in order to access funding? We need to start looking at my favorite word, data. Who provides funding to the the Mediterranean region? Yeah, who does? And if he does, on what basis? We need to ask. We need to ask relevant questions to get relevant answers. And that I would say, because as I said, they had 46 ministers in that forum where I was actually, there is a platform, myself talking about climate change and also talking about, women and gender. And this were in OECD was there, ministers were there, everybody was there. It was so amazing, but that costs a lot of money. It was a 5-star hotel with over 2 days. And so that essentially means, what is our key question? Because thought alone will not do it. And governments have to be influenced. And civil society have to be motivated, encouraged. I know from CIF, from this Climate Investment Funds, that they have a gender department, which I work very closely with, apart from the fact that I was an official observer, which meant I kept my independence. And in that regard, I do believe that there is a lot, that there must be, and there is a way to fund projects which are well thought out. It's just so a committee, a finance committee. Anybody who has, an AI skill would be able to access anything in this new world that we live in. I agree, Reverend, with your plea, i.e., we haven't mentioned that, but that's a huge barrier. There are two huge barriers. One is technology, which you're experiencing now, and I sympathize. And the second one is data, how to collect data and all that sort of thing. Now, each of you, if you come from different governments, you ought to understand what the structure says about gender. Not that they have a plan, forget about that. We're talking about, yes, we have a plan, and GEWE is there and all these sort of things, However, who is responsible for that plan? What sort of finance do they have? What skills are required? For example, should you not be thinking about training gender officers? Expertise in gender comes from many different fields. Mine is economics. Gender economics. You know me, Madeline. I've been in the gender economics field most of the time, looking and fighting and issuing warnings about how much is needed that we get that economic independence forward. And if you're a government leader, like in the European Parliament, I can count on members of the European Parliament. I can go there and say, hey, guys, stop with this bloody, language which doesn't help us. Why do you have to start thinking about that rather than, humanist? We are human beings. That's my latest platform. Not just women, not just men, not transgender, nothing of the kind. Everything is about the gender. The only gender that we need to consider very clearly is the gender of humanity. Human beings, children, young, old, everywhere. Concept of humanity is very, very important nowadays, given the political. So to answer your question, I would suggest structuring ourselves in a way that we can make an impact. That would be my suggestion. And to get a committee, a funding committee, which, with volunteers that are willing to sort of get on the AI or whatever, artificial intelligence can research, what, and then, Madeleine, your role as a leader is to actually, identify lobbyists that can actually move forward, that agenda, that concept. There's a structure, and the structure is most necessary, so that we don't lose the impetus and we don't lose the talent that you have put together. Does
Interesting.
Make sense?
It does. It definitely does. And I think it's something that we've been talking as well for some times. And I like the fact that you are saying we, because you are always committed to having this structure in place. And I think, now is the time. So we will be discussing about that and just see how we can take this forward. I think time for action is now. and not just talking. We have Reverend, who is also very, very vocal with regard to access to funding for women entrepreneurs and so on. And we will definitely continue to, to mobilize ourselves. But I agree with you that the time is now. We need to put a
And there are
structure.
very powerful women out there.
There are powerful women.
Not only within Africa, but just think about it. The Microsoft lady, I've forgotten her name, Melinda Gates.
Melinda Gates.
She gives a lot of money for technology. And now the Reverend has mentioned a very very key. For 3 years, I've been looking at proposals and I've been looking at financing. And I have now, there was one particular program of the CIF that was about forest and people and, in how to mitigate with knowledge that comes from women. Because women have been tending to the land. And that was CIF looking for, within the group, to give finance to communities in that area, in agriculture. So many fields. So many wonderful fields, I say.
Great. So I think definitely the time is now. We will definitely start working on this immediately. So as we get toward the end of this debate and discussion, just to each one of you, let's just reflect for a moment. For the next 5 years, we're in 2026. Let's say even 4 years, because the SDG is in 4 years, in 2030 is in 4 years. So for the next 4 years, what must be changed for women's leadership across politics, corporate, entrepreneurship in Africa, so that we can see the breakthrough that we want to see? Really just your final thoughts, each one of you. Let me just start with Reverend. Your final thoughts. What must be changed, considering the SDGs ending in 4 years?
I don't think she can hear you.
Yeah, I think you are muted, and yeah, I think you're still muted. Okay. There you go.
Okay. You were saying, I'm sorry. Let me not say I didn't enjoy the meeting, but most of the voices were just on and off, on and off. Can you please repeat what you just said?
All right. Now, the final question. So we are now reflecting just on the final question, which is in 4 years' time, it will be in 4 years' time, it will be basically the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, which end in 2030. We should have seen the result. So for you as a leader, in 4 years' time, what change do you want to see in women's leadership across politics, corporate, or entrepreneurship? Whatever recommendation you would have.
I think what I have to say now is that we women, we don't have a competent issue. No, we don't. What we lack is a structured access. We lack structured access. We lack institutional reforms. And most of us lack the political will. Women need a lot of a lot of courage to be able to do that which we need to do. And that is where I always emphasize on the need of collaboration, networking, and partnership. Because if we encourage a lot of partnership, not competition, a lot of collaboration, which I'm passionate about, and which you are aware of, we'll find out that we come as a group, we'll be able to assess, even if we don't assess it directly, but we were able to access most of the funds and put together our structure and have institutional reforms and the will, the courage to go forward. I think we are not incompetence. We don't lack competence. What we lack is the will, the courage, the courage to go forward, women, the courage to do a lot, the courage to stand out, and another thing is, I would like to mention is that we need a lot of expand women focus investment. We need it a lot. And access to procurement systems. Then a lot of support women-led trade networks. Like I keep saying, women trade network, because one cannot do it alone. The Bible says that one will chase 1,000, but two chases can chase 10,000. Women have been performing alone, from the margin. We need to come together as a stronger force in a partnership, collaboration through intra-African trade in particular, cross-border and pushing a lot, and we've been succeeding in some areas. So in it all, we need a lot of collaboration and networking and not competition.
Yeah, women are very much competent. I love as well the aspect of political will, because that is very, very important, especially when you start talking about the cross-border trading and so on. Actually, next week we'll look at cross-border trading or just African trading. So I think it's actually very, very important.
I think inclusivity is also important. I think 5 years moving forward from now is that it's important that we look at inclusivity policies that will include women participation in governance, in corporate, and also in areas of finance. So I don't want to waste a lot of time, but thank you so much for the event. I know Zanella would like to say a few things which we're going to be learning from. Thank you so much, Madeleine.
Ideas.
Great. No,
I
thank
think
you
I
so
have
much.
said enough.
Yes, Zanella.
No, I think I have said enough. Really, I have to know my place somehow. My final word is we have to organize ourselves towards a target. The Reverend has mentioned how difficult it is, and one thing is networks. I agree with you 100%. Network. The second thing is mentoring. I agree with you also, Dr. Moagi. I think, Madeleine is a good coordinator, a good connector, a good segmenter. I think, the final word here is we need to think carefully, but we also need to think positively about the future, because the future is ours. And the heading is an article by a very prominent Spanish news magazine is Africa Zanella says, you can't have sustainability without women. That's the threat. There's a threat that every corporate has to hear, whether they like it or not, because we are more than 50% of the population. And that's it. That's how I started working with the UN, because they challenged me. They said, oh, yeah, we understand the human rights and blah, blah, blah. And, get away from the freaking human rights and start thinking about how we can become leaders in the societal sense.